Good evening and welcome to this edition of Twilight on CRTV News. Welcome back. You're watching Twilight on CRTV News. It's our daily news analysis show. And I am joined by a quite unique guest this evening. Dr. Peter Baofu is an American visionary and author of 141 new theories and visions in 175 scholarly books as of February 2022, and numerous articles to provide a visionary challenge to conventional wisdom in all fields of knowledge, the social sciences, the formal sciences, natural sciences, and the humanities, with the aim for unified theories of everything, together with numerous visions of future histories in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. Good evening, Doctor, and welcome to Cameroon.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure having you. I know your work spans lots of different fields, but we're going to try as much as possible to focus our conversation this evening on poverty on the African continent, and talk a little bit as well as about global peace, because I want to believe that there is a link between these two issues. What, in your opinion, are the factors that favor poverty in Africa, and do you feel they can be reversed?
Well, that is a very important question, and also a very huge question too. First of all, poverty, it depends on the definition to be poor. But I do think that Africa is not poor. In terms of resources, Africa has one of the most natural resource endowments in the world. And so in that sense, Africa is quite well known to be very rich. And that's why a lot of countries and colonial powers, by the way, in history, they came to Africa because they know that you have a lot of resources. Not just natural resources, but also human resources. And that's why, in that sense, Africa is very rich. The only problem is that how can you transform your natural endowment into a high level of development? That is the challenge. And as you know, Africa has not been able to do that, even though they have a lot of resources, more than anyone else as a continent, even more than Asia, China, the US, Russia, for example. So that is the challenge. So what is the favorable condition? That is one of the most favorable conditions. And that's why if you compare that, let's say, with some other countries, let's say China, why do you think China has to make everything? Why? Well, because they don't have the resources that Africa has. Look at Hong Kong is another example. They import almost everything. Why? Well, because they don't have much of any natural resources. And that's why they have to make everything, because that's very important for survival. If you do not make everything, how do you survive? And there's a huge population in China. So that's a good example that people have to think about. You have the good, favorable conditions, but on the other hand, you also have the handicaps. And in the case of Africa, we can talk about a long list of factors. Let's say some domestic factors. I have been in Africa for many years now. I have been in probably about 30 different African countries as part of my global tour. And I can see that there are a lot of different problems over here. And one of the most important challenges is the mindset, I think. Corruption is a good example, but by corruption, I don't mean the Western definition of corruption. That is extremely misleading, because the Western definition of corruption is to make the West look very favorable and make other people look very bad. But Western countries are also very corrupt too. But you have to go beyond their definition and look into some other legalized forms of corruption, which are probably one of the worst corruptions on earth. So in the case of Africa, what I mean by corruption is that is the mindset. The mindset is Africa has what the local people here called la joie de vivre, the joy of life.
Yes, I was actually going to ask you if being developed translates into being happy, because I know lots of people who live in rural Africa and whom you would look at and think, oh, these people are suffering, but their level of happiness is so high. You can't believe that they are so happy living on so little.
Do you follow the index? I do not remember the name of the index, but it's some kind of happiness index. Some years ago, I do not remember which year, some of the African countries like Nigeria, they were ranked as the most happiest countries on earth. So if you look into those indexes, I'm sure there are some biases on that too, but the point is, you are right. Happiness, that's why I mentioned La Joie de Vivre is a good example, because I do think that development is a relative concept. You have a lot of good things about Africa that I want to mention, but on the other hand, there is a trade-off. The trade-off is that the more you want that, the less you will have on the others. And that's why I mentioned corruption, because the African mindset does not have like the work ethics like the Chinese or the Japanese. For example, in China, or in Japan, or in Korea, people often talk about to be honorable, to be good. What it means is that how well you are in school, whether you are at the top of the class, or whether you pass all the exams. Some of them even commit suicide. Do you know that? In Africa, if you commit suicide because you failed an exam in school, that's laughable. No one look up at you. If you are very good in football, you are admired. Here in Africa, for example, I noticed that women often talk to babies in a way that they want the baby to be strong. Or sometimes in the local conversation, not just over here, but also in many other countries that I have been in. There is a pattern that si tu ne manges pas ça, je te frapper. I mean, I'm going to hit you. So that means that you want to be strong is a very important concept here. Or if you do not do this, I'm going to hit you. In China, they don't talk like that. They talk in a different fashion. So you can see the focus of life is very different over here. And that's why happiness over here, in Africa, people can be poor, but they enjoy life. I mean, people with the slightest provocation can dance, can play. Even old ladies can dance on the street. But you seldom see that in Japan or in China. Why? Or in Europe. So the mindset is different over here. So if you want to be developed, you have to have certain kind of workaholic mindset. But in Africa, you don't have, except in sports, like football, for example. Look at how much they follow the African Cup.
Of Nations.
But they don't follow, let's say, annually you have the mathematical Olympia in math or in chess. They don't pay attention to that. No one cares. But in some of those countries that I mentioned, they care about those competitions. They want to be number one.
So
you see that?
It's really all about our priorities, more or less.
Yes. So that's why in my book, one of the theories, I have proposed more than 141 theories, new theories to understand humanity, not just in one field,
domain.
But in all fields of human knowledge. And one of them is what I call post-capitalism. And I predict that capitalism, as we understand that, will not survive in the future. It will be replaced by a superior system of economics. I call that post-capitalism. And in post-capitalism, there is the notion that there's no wealth without poverty, and there's no poverty without wealth. So what I mean by that is that every notion of wealth that you want to pursue to be developed, you are also poor too. But every poverty that you end up having, intentionally or unintentionally, you are also developing your wealth, but in a different way. Then, of course, if you develop wealth in this way, you glorify that. And you would dismiss your poverty, don't talk about it. In the West, they have their own conception of that development. They focus on their wealth that they want to talk about. They ignore some other thing, which I call poverty, but they don't like to talk about it. And that is the indexes, that is the propaganda, the sociology, the politics of indexing.
Yeah, definitely. Just a reminder, our viewers, that Dr. Baofu is in Cameroon as part of a global tour, which will take him to over 120 countries for a research on ethnographic research on humanity that he is carrying out. So let's pursue our conversation on Africa and the whole issue of poverty. Many Africans tend to blame colonialism and neocolonialism as two issues, either that cost them much in the past and is still holding them down from evolving. What do you think?
Okay, now, fine, but we are shifting now the question in a different way. Before we were talking about the domestic issue. Now you're talking about the international issue. Okay, we can talk about it, but I just want to tell you that now we are shifting the conversation in a different dimension altogether. Yes, internationally, I do agree with that to some extent. I do think that the colonial legacy and also now neo-colonial, post-colonial, by the way, has been affecting Africa a lot. So in a way, I think that is a burden, but in another way, I think that there's just a blaming game that is not good. Let me talk about first the exploitation and all this problem, and then I'll talk about the blaming. It's quite true that the European colonial legacy in Africa is just horrific. I mean, I don't need to mention that everyone who has done research and knew how much suffering, not just in terms of slavery, that is a very important issue, but also in terms of exploitation. We are talking about how the Europeans have exploited, enslaved you, and extracted all these resources, and they did not pay for that. It's not just for 1 week. We're talking about several hundred of years. They ship all these natural resources, silver, gold, and all that, all the way to Africa, to Europe. We're not talking about 1 day or 1 week. Think about how much they owe you without paying. Why do they do that? Because they have the power. You did not have the power to kick them out. So that is a question of power. It's not true even before that. I mean, human history has seen a lot of that. I'm not saying that they are the only one, but you mentioned that. But you talk about the Roman Empire. Yeah. It's the same thing you talk about the Mongolian Empire. The same thing you could talk about the Russian Empire. The same thing you talk about the Japanese Empire. Like everyone has been doing that. So in a sense, yes, that is a problem. But on the other hand, there's also a blaming game because this happened many years ago. I always mention this. Look at Hong Kong and Singapore. Hong Kong was colonized by the UK. Singapore was also colonized by the UK. And now Singapore and Hong Kong have a higher income per capita than the UK. Now, when you blame other people, sometimes you forget.
It's not working.
Yeah, it's not working because how come the China, by the way, the people in Hong Kong, the majority of them are Chinese. They are part of China, but it was part of the collapse of the Chinese Empire in the 19th century. So the British came in and tried to take advantage of that, not just the UK, the Portuguese, the French, many other powers too, they are trying to come in, get something. And Singapore too, used to be part of Malaysia, but it was colonized by the British, and the majority of the population in Singapore, they are Chinese too. But how come the Chinese over there, they are able to develop? They are even much better than the British in terms of they are even richer than the former colonialists. You see, I want to give you an example, not to depress you, but to empower you, to inspire you. Stop blaming. By the way, it's not just in Africa. Look at America. I'm from the US. Black Americans are doing the same thing too. They blame the slavery 700 years ago. I'm not saying that it was good, and no one was saying that. Of
course, they have to get past it.
It's obvious. Slavery. I do not want to be enslaved too, by the way. Neither are you. But I'm just saying that the more you think like that, the more you sink, because you don't look into your responsibility and what you can do. It's very easy to blame because all of a sudden you're the good guy and the other people are always the evil guy, the bad guy.
You're shifting responsibility.
Yeah. So I
have not taking ownership.
I have nothing wrong with me. You're the evil guy. You're the bad guy. All my problems is because of you. You are racist. You are racist. You are racist. Every time you say you are racist, don't criticize me because you are racist. You are a colonialist. You are a fascist. Fine. When you talk like that, all of a sudden, what are you going to do for yourself? Nothing. Stop. A good example, by the way, is Rwanda. Rwanda is a good example for development because it's bad and good. It's good in a certain way because Rwanda is trying to get out of their mindset. I was also interviewed on TV too, by the way, in Rwanda.
Okay.
And I also told them about the same problem. They are making some progress, but they are still blaming too, by the way. The blaming again doesn't stop, but at least they are taking some responsibility to develop. Ethiopia is doing the same thing too. So I'm not saying that the international order, the colonial and neo-colonial, is always bad. But I think that sometimes you are encouraging that. Let me give you one example. Nowadays, you have the CFA, the French francs over here. Why are you keep using that? Every time when you allow other country to use the currency, that means that they are controlling your economy. Your money supply is not up to you. It's up to them to control you. But now you are blaming the colonizer, but you have been accepting it. Now you are speaking French here. Why are you speaking French? How come you don't speak your own language? And now you blame the other guy that they colonized you, but you should stop doing that instead of just blaming. You see that? Now you
take some responsibility.
So now you forget the fact that, look, I went to some schools in Africa. When I look at the textbooks they are made in France, or the French textbooks, or the English textbooks. How come you do not produce textbook for yourself? And what they teach you is a colonial mindset. You know more about Europe than you know more about your own country. Now you are blaming the other country that they do, but you are encouraging that even right now they are changing the currency to eco. But eco is part of the EU. That means that you are just transferring, because why? Because France now is part of the EU. So now you are stop using France, but you are using EU, but your colonial legacy is still, in fact, they are even much stronger now. You're not just one country. The entire European system is controlling you. So instead of blaming, why do we keep doing that? You see that blaming is not, and
it's
also the military bases. Look at all these military bases that you have. They are French military bases over in West Africa, but you allow that. You allow that, and then you keep blaming. At the end of the day, you say, well, they are so bad because they are here. But you have been doing this. You encourage them. You cannot take care of your own security.
What do you feel then can be done to improve the internal conditions which affect the development of Africa?
I think that you have to reverse all of this. But how do you do it? I think that there are some major problems. By the way, this is not just a question of development. It's also a question of politics too. It's a question of war and peace too. Why? Because it is much more complicated internationally. I think that Africa is moving toward that direction. The African Union, for example, is trying to do something about it. But the problem is that the African Union is also having some other problems which are also inherent in Africa too. The tribal system in Africa is very intense. People again blame the European colonial system of dividing you, but I'm just saying that even before the Europeans came, Africa has a lot of different tribes, and they fought against each other. And this tribal mentality is still very deep in Africa. Look at all this conflict in Rwanda. Why do you have the genocide? In Ethiopia, why do you have they have the civil war going on right now, for example? Now, I'm not going to mention them. In Western Africa, you have a lot of conflicts between Sudan and South Sudan, in Somalia and Somaliland, for example, Eritrea and Ethiopia, for example. And now you have all these different problems in different Western Africa. Different groups do not get along with each other. In Mali, in Nigeria, in many of these, you have different conflicts among different groups, and many of them are along the tribal lines. So you see that. So even Africa is not that the colonial system which come to divide you, is that even before they come, you have been dividing yourself along the tribal lines. In many African countries, I don't even need to mention names, often you have one group in power. When they come into power, they often share the power with those who belong to their own tribe. And they often distrust or dismiss or maybe degrade a little bit the other tribe or the other group. This kind of tribal system is very intense in Africa. It's difficult for Africa to have a sharing mindset. Once I'm in power, that power is mine.
It's my turn.
It's my turn. And I share that only with my group, however you define that group. And that's why you have the coup d'etat you have Mali, for example, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso, and all that, and also many other systems which are also, even in Rwanda, by the way, there's a very ironic case. They are trying to more and more develop, but the system also become more and more authoritarian. Even after the end of the genocide, you have different ethnic groups. They also fight against each other, but in a very suppressed manner. They don't speak out.
Okay.
You see that? So this is a kind of a problem facing Africa. So it can go either way, but I think that you have to go beyond blaming again. So there are solutions, by the way, but blaming is not one of them.
Definitely, we will be talking about the solutions. What do you feel, okay, are the promises and the limits of this improvement in terms of internal conditions?
The internal condition is that I think that they are also doing that. I have to mention something that you have not yet mentioned. I think the younger generation is the hope. Why? Because the younger generation, they have the opportunity to get out. And they see what's going on outside. They come back in. And because they are young, they are learning. And they often do not follow the mindset of the older generation. They do, but at least they are much more open. Now, that's good and bad, by the way. The bad thing is that you may end up being just another generation of copying everything from the West.
You're
or
losing
from
your identity.
Your identity is still colonial because you still copy from whatever is the advanced countries. They are always good. You just copy them. Now, that is a very self-destructive way of development. But on the other hand, you also have opportunity. The opportunity is at least they look outside the box. And now they say maybe we should do something to make that, use what you learn from the outside, but put it inside what your cultural development opportunity.
Well, we will be continuing our conversation with Dr. Baofu in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Twilight on CRTV News, and I'm in the company of Dr. Peter Baofu, who is an academic scholar from the US and who has published quite an impressive number of books and has taught in universities across the world. We were talking a while ago about poverty on the African continent. And do you feel that in any way poverty in Africa can be a challenge to global peace?
Yes and no. Obviously, if Africa is very poor and because poverty often can lead to a lot of different social problems and political problems, and that may lead to violence and wars and all that. And that has international implications because outside powers will not just sit there and watch. Now we have to talk about international structure because that's very important. If you look at human history, every time when you have a continent or a region and which is in conflict, outside powers do not just sit there and do nothing because they want to come in. Because when you are weak, when you are divided, you give them an opportunity to come in and conquer. So if you look at human history, all empires have been doing the same thing. They look around and see if there's any regions which is weak, which is the people fighting against each other. They will come in. And when they come in, they will divide and conquer. They will use excuses. So what is the implication? The implication that if you do not resolve the issues of poverty in Africa, they will come in and colonize you again.
You're leaving a window open.
Yes, you. Now this is a stop blaming now. It is to look into yourself, that what you do to yourself has consequences. And those consequences give the opportunity to other people and colonize you. They don't need to colonize you in the same old way. Now you have colonial, neo-colonial, post-colonial, and post-colonial. So you have different ways for them. I don't want to mention names. As you know that now there is a war going on somewhere in Europe. I'm not going to mention them. But I'm just saying that that is just a good example that when you have a region which has some problem, and that region is often sandwiched between major power blocks like the Western-led alliance versus the non-Western-led alliance, whatever it is. They compete for powers. So every time when there is an opportunity, one group will come in and the other group will fight back, or the other group will come in and this group will fight back, and this continue. So in the case of Africa, what happens if you do not resolve that? It has international implications. They come in. In the case of Africa, I mentioned this before. Why do you still have the bases? Why do you ask friends to come in and provide your national security? You see that? That has international implication now, because they also have their own interest to come in.
To defend, definitely.
Yeah. So you see that. So to answer your question, what if you do not develop? But on the other hand, as I said before, development is relative. There's no wealth without poverty, and there's no poverty without wealth. So development and poverty is relative. There's a trade-off here. What do you want? Just have to use your own word. What is your priority in life? You have to go back to, so is your question about your own identity. No one else can tell you what to do. If they do, that means that they try to colonize you. That's what they tell you what to do. But you have to do what you want to do. But whatever you choose, remember, it has consequences. If you do that correctly, fine, congratulations, good job. But if you mess up, they jump in and they will just go after you. So I leave the question in the end to you. You have to find out what is the trade-off. What is your priority? If you want to behave like the Europeans or the Chinese or the Koreans, whatever that might be, then ask yourself, are you Chinese? Are you Europeans? No, you are African. So you have to find out who you are. But at the same time, learn from the others. Look what China has done in the last 40 years. They know their identity. They know that they are Chinese. But they learn from others. They also learn from the West. And now they develop, but without being Western.
They've conceived a model that is part international and part Chinese.
So in that sense, they understand themselves very well. Even when Western power try to pressure them to do this and this, they know their own identity. They know that, well, you have your own values, we have our own values. You respect our values, we respect yours. And that's called, in a way, that's democratic too. But if I impose my values on you and call that universal, then I contradict myself. How can my value be universal if you do not want it and I have to kill you and bomb you to force you to follow it? That means that my value cannot be universal then, because you are resisting me.
Definitely.
But if you don't resist me, you welcome me, then of course then I say, yeah, it's universal.
You've accepted it.
You accept it. It's universal.
You're creating the universality by allowing others to impose.
But if I come in and conquer and divide and force you and sanction you and bomb you and do this and this, that means that your values, whatever you say, no one wants to listen, but you have to force them, and there's no good end to that in the end.
Do you think there can be any local conditions which contribute to improving a global peace?
Yes. In the case of Africa, I have been, as I said before, I have been in more than 100, maybe 20 different countries by now. So I have been all over. And I have lived in Africa for 4 or 5 years already, not continuously, but in and out, and more than probably 20 or 30 different African countries: North Africa, Western Africa, Eastern Africa, Central Africa, and Southern Africa. And I see a lot of hope too. I do think that especially the younger generation, again, the youth, the young people that I spoke to, they tend to be much more open to new ideas, to changes. They just don't just follow the older generation doing the same old thing. So my hope, in a way, relies on them. But on the other hand, I also see the pitfalls. The pitfalls is that they are too young. They often fall into the propaganda of outside powers. They end up doing the job for outside powers. And that's the most dangerous. Because when you are learning, that's good. You are open-minded. But the dark side of that, you end up doing the job, the colonial job of outside powers come to colonize you again. Because now you think that you go outside, you become more developed. You think that you know more than your own people. You come in now, you have to teach them. You do not respect the older generations anymore. You do not respect your values anymore. You think you are better because you have been in other countries that are much more advanced. You come in and teach them. Now you have this kind of mindset, you destroy yourself in the end because you are colonizing your own countries for other people. And that's the danger. But on the other hand, I also see the hope. The hope is that they're opening to change. They are questioning some of the corruption that I just mentioned. I think that's a good start. Look at African Union. I think the African Union is also doing some good things too. They are really trying to work together as a group to improve the conditions in Africa. But again, just like the Olympics, you watch the Olympics, you are very good, but they are also very good too. You run, they also run too. You are very fast, but they are also very fast too. So whoever runs the fastest will get a gold medal. And then you get a bronze or the silver, whatever. So you may be progressing too, but if other ones are progressing much faster than you are still behind, even though you are progressing. So that is the two sides of the same coin that I try to portray to you.
Basically, Africa is making progress,
yes,
but they need to do something that enables them meet up with the best in whatever field they're working
because ranking is not absolute. Ranking is relative. You can be making a lot of improvement, but if other people are even faster than you are still behind them. Even when you are making a lot of progress, you are very proud of yourself. Ranking is relative. Okay,
maybe we wrap up on these. What do you feel needs to be done to improve international conditions which affect global peace?
I think that international condition is not just up to you. It's also up to how much power that you have and how much power they have over you. If you look at the international power structure, it's quite clear. I'm not going to mention names. It's quite clear. It's dominated by one or two power blocks. And the rest of them just follow. International news, by the way, think about it. Who are those powers which are dictating decisions for the rest of the world? Not you, not Cameroon, not Rwanda, not Benin. No, none of them. I'm not going to mention them. Who are those powers? They make up all the decisions. And they call that the world's opinions. But do you accept that? Do you approve that? Do you have any say on it?
No, not necessarily.
None of you. And that is the international power structure that we live in. So when you make about that question, it's not just up to you. You have good intention, but once you lack that power, in the end, there's not much that you can do. On the other hand, as I said before, if you are good, you can still progress. Just like what I mentioned, look at Hong Kong and Singapore. And look at China too, by the way.
It's a process, more or less.
40 years ago, China was very poor. Poorer than some of the African countries. Look at the 1960s. Look at Maoist China. They were so poor, they were famine. And yet now China is the most powerful economy in the world, surpassing the US in 2014, based on purchasing power parity. Look at Hong Kong and Singapore. 100 years ago, they were under the British colonial control. Now they're even richer. So you can still progress. There's hope. But if you do it right, you will be there, piece by piece, gradually. But on the other hand, if you mess up, you will be behind, even if you are progressing. It's relative. So yes, there's hope, but there's also fear. There's war. But there's also peace too. It's just the other side of the same coin.
Whenever it comes to international peace and global peace and world order and power structures, I have the feeling that there's a trust issue that I'm tempted to say the weaker nations might have relative to the bigger powers, because they are supposed to dictate the pace, but rarely are they honestly, looking for a level playing field. They are always trying to, at the end of the day, keep a few, twists and turns that would continue preserving their hegemony.
This is also a very interesting question in a different way. If you look at the homeless people, the poor people around the world, and I have been in so many countries, and I have been with them, and I stay with them, and I understand them quite well. I can see that there's also a hope. A lot of people in the world, they are poor, they are homeless. They also have the same wish that you have. How come we are always like that? How come that we cannot have an impact too? We are also part of the system, and yet we are also neglected. We have been dismissed, disrespected. No one cares about our opinions. They make all the decisions, not us. But whatever they do affect all of us. And whatever decision, every outcome, they always gain, we lose most of the time. So I do have the hope, sincere hope that they can do something, but I have to be very careful and realistic over here. Don't be so romantic, by the way. International situation often is quite realistic. So if you become too romantic, sometimes you get caught up with the rhetoric, but in the end, you are still the homeless, the poor. So I do think, on the other hand, that the poor countries now, they have been doing that. If you look at the international orders, let's say in the last few decades, the non-allied countries, the third world countries, I mean, they have been working on that issue. It's not that they have done nothing, except that because there's not a homogeneous group. There are so many different countries. Each of them has their own interests, and also, by the way, have their own selfishness, corruption, and all that. So they are now really working together.
It's no united front, so it weakens their cause, more or less.
That is self-destructive. So, but they also have some corruption too, by the way, to take care of. So yes, I do think that there's some hope on that, but I think that you have to be a bit more realistic and not to get carried away with the hope sometimes.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Baofu. That's all we had time for today on Twilight. Hope we would be able to have a more in-depth conversation some other time. For those who joined us along the way, just to remind you that Dr. Baofu is an American academic scholar who has about 141 new theories in about 175 scholarly books. Has earned various awards across the world. He was a U.S. Fulbright scholar in the Far East. He taught as professor at different universities in Western Europe, the Caucasus, the Middle East, the Balkans, Central Asia, South Asia, North America, and Southeast Asia. He finished more than 5 academic degrees, including a PhD from the world-renowned Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. So it's been a pleasure sharing ideas with you. Looking forward to another opportunity. Enjoy your stay in Cameroon. You're carrying out a study on ethnographic research. Good luck with that, and looking forward to your next publications. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for watching CRTV News. Stay on. Our primetime newscast comes up in under 2 minutes.